Awesome. So, I'm Owen Creger, and this is my presentation, Building a Comprehensive Incident Management Program. The program they gave you from CircleCityCon was missing my bio. So to give you a little bit of background, I had been working for an unnamed large multinational organization that was in a lot of different areas. There's about 60,000 employees based in 100 different countries, and I was running their incident management program for them. So I sort of know what I'm talking about, I guess, maybe. These are my views. They're not anyone else's. And you'll see at the bottom, I started my own consulting firm helping organizations build their plans and deal with these things. So let's get started. So like any great presentation, you have to have an agenda. And so I'm going to talk about the 4 things that make up a comprehensive program. These are a plan, preparing for incidents, practicing, and then being able to measure your program so that you can improve it and communicate with senior management as to how well things are going or to help you get more money to make things go better. So let's get started when it comes to a plan. So great quote from Benjamin Franklin. Lack of a plan is basically a plan to fail. So our plan's basically broken into several different sections. There's a purpose, goals, scope, defines roles and responsibilities, how to report the incidents, and then the various phases of how to manage an incident. So your purpose, you basically want to define the steps to detect, assess, contain, analyze. This purpose of your plan, ensure the proper documentation, and also to establish roles, responsibilities, and the accountability of handling it. Your goals for your plan, verify that your incident has occurred, maintain or restore business continuity, be able to reduce impact, learn from and prevent future incidents, those sorts of things. Also, very important is to keep management informed. I need to make my screen a little bigger on this side. I can keep track of where I'm at. So when it comes to the scope, basically, who does the plan apply to? Generally, scopes of these incident response plans, they actually apply to everyone within your organization. And what does the plan apply to? These are your security events and incidents. And we'll talk about what an event and what an incident is. I like the definitions from ISO 27002. So an event is something that's happened that is odd, basically, is what their definition is. And then an incident is actually a collection of events. So you see a system's behaving oddly. You see several systems behaving oddly. You put these events together, you'll see that they actually are an incident. And so it actually helps the organization understand what it is you're actually talking about. There's some rather lengthy and wordy descriptions. If you want to look them up under ISO, you can do that. I'm going to skip them. All right, so on to roles and responsibilities. There are, under this type of plan, there's basically 5 roles. They're general roles. You have an executive sponsor. You have an incident response manager, technical specialists, business process leaders, and then the catch-all of people. Your executive sponsor, their role, typically this is a senior executive. So your CISO, a vice president of some type, they are overall responsible for the program itself. Having it at a high level is actually a very good thing. Provides you some pretty good cover when things go wrong. They act as a liaison between the incident response manager, and I'll talk about what their role is and what function they run, and the business process leaders. Big recommendation I always make, the last thing you want to have happen is one of your help desk folks or just a plain old end user sees something going strange, and so they call up the FBI, All right, that's the last thing you want. That's why under this role, only your executive sponsor has the authority to escalate anything to law enforcement. And they typically do this under the guidance of corporate counsel. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And I also put the training of the incident response team underneath this role as well. It's actually a requirement under several of the standards that your team receive regular training. Putting it at a little bit lower level in the flow of responsibilities can become problematic. People's budgets get cut, whatnot. So if it's at a high enough level, your training budget is pretty well established and close to guaranteed things happen. So the next role that we're going to talk about is your incident response manager. They behave like a program or a project manager, right? Their sole project is to manage an incident. They coordinate the process. They also ensure that there's a 24/7 point of contact. They may not be the point of contact. It may be other incident analysts that receive the phone call or the email, but their responsibility is to make sure that there's always somebody staffed able to take those calls. They're also responsible for assessing the risk of the incident, and then they coordinate with the executive sponsor, and they also handle the escalation, and we'll talk about escalation later on in the process. It's one of the 5 or 6 phases of incident management. Technical specialists, it's kind of a wide, broad role as well. This is made up of your incident response analysts, help desk folks, system admins, network folks, those types of things. Their role is for the detection, documentation, reporting, and then working with the incident response manager. And you're going to hear this from me several times, but if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And collecting the proper documentation is critical when you're dealing with incidents. The next role is business process leaders. These are all your non-technical folks, so HR, legal, corporate communications, investor relations. Once again, same type of responsibilities that the technical specialists have. Detecting incidents, documenting them, reporting them, and then working with the incident response manager as well. The next role is your catch-all people. This is everybody else in the organization, whether they're your customer support folks, your janitor, whoever, they all fall within this role. Once again, same type of responsibilities. They're there to detect incidents, document them, report them, and then work with the incident response manager. One thing I didn't mention earlier, the team that gets made up of these various roles is kind of an ad hoc team. So it's kind of a combination. Many organizations will have a standard or set team of folks who handle incidents. Others will have like an ad hoc team. This is kind of a cross between the two. So you'd have a group of incident response analysts and your incident response manager as permanent positions and roles, but then depending on the type of incident, you're also bringing in these other ad hoc roles. So you're dealing with, anonymous has come by and defaced your website. It's known throughout the internet. So you'll probably want to get corporate communications involved, investor relations, those types of people. So we're going to talk about the 6 phases of the incident management process. I call them phases because many of them can happen concurrently instead of in a straight line. And they're detection, assessment, containment, analysis, remediation, and then the valuable post-mortem. So the detection process is basically the finding of the incident, when the thing went wrong. And there are 3 general sources that you'll find in it, detect an incident from. They're people, audits, and alerts. So people noticing something's going weird. Audits, you've got a system administrator who's looking through their logs and sees that there's an account there that's been brute forcing passwords. or alerts, which are, your IDS has picked something up odd. And once again, documentation is key. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. At this phase, it's critical to capture the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who detected it? When did they detect it? How did they detect it? Did they do anything while they were looking through the system? It's critical to capture actions taken on system. That way, when you're going through the analysis phase, you know what's potentially changed, where this person's been in the system when they were doing or handling the detection of it. The assessment, in this phase of the incident, you've collected as much basic information as you can about the system, what processes it hosts, business processes, those sorts of things, who detected it, and now you need to try and figure out exactly how bad is this incident from the information that we've collected. So we're going to talk about the methodology of how to assess these things. You're going to end up with an assessed risk, and then at the end of the assessment process, there's an escalation process. So depending on how you, what ratings have come out of the assessment process will guide you as to who to bring on to this ad hoc team to help manage this incident. So methodology, the one I use, I have it broken into characteristics and then the impact of the incident. There's 3 characteristics. The type of incident. You can use all kinds of different types. A really good place to get started is the NIST Special Publication 800-61. These generally fall into the inappropriate use, unauthorized access or use, unauthorized disclosure, asset loss, so someone lost their laptop or it was stolen, it's been corrupted, denial of service, and then there's always threat to personal safety. Those are ones that you would actually, typically I recommend passing off to physical security folks. You have a source. These are very simple. There's 3 of them: internal, external, malware, and the catch-all unknown. Don't know where it came from. The target. This is based on the classification of the data that the system or systems that have been impacted hold, house, access, those sorts of things. You can generally break it into confidential, unclassified, or whatever data classification scheme that you're using within your organization. And then the impact is broken into severity and exposure. To determine the severity, I generally use 3 catch-all groups: high, medium, and low. You're going to have to go back to your organization and figure out what these mean to you. How many assets are with a high impact or a high severity incident? These are generally significant asset revenue or productivity losses. So what do those mean to your organization? Is it $1's loss? Is it $100, $1,000, $1 million, whatnot? Same thing with the mediums and the lows. So you're going to have to go back, work with your risk management team, and determine at exactly what point do we say this is a medium risk or a high risk or high severity. And then the exposure is very simple. Is it known only within our organization, or is it known outside the organization? So you take all of these together, you've built a matrix of, if it's known outside, it's high severity, those sorts of things. Your matrix basically cranks out whether it's a high risk, medium risk, or low risk incident. This helps you facilitate the prioritization of your incidents. Typically, you're going to be handling more than one. Hopefully that never happens, but let's be truthful. They usually seem to come in groups. So now that you've assessed the risk of the incident or assigned it a risk, whether it's high, medium, or low, you now go through the escalation process. The purpose of the escalation process is to bring in the right people at the right time and in the right way. And the escalation process, you'll build out exactly who and under what circumstances, so under what ratings when you've done your assessment, are these folks to be brought in. When are you going to bring in your legal counsel? When do you bring in investor relations? Is it when one personally identifiable record's lost? Is it when 100 are lost? When there's required reporting, so depending on the standards you're trying to meet, the regulations you fall under, or the laws that pertain to either that data, that person's data, or the jurisdiction you reside in, will help define when it is you want to pull these folks in. Man, I forgot my note on multipath. So the escalation typically happens within in multiple paths within your organization. So you have an incident, you've identified what system's been hit, you know what product is on it, so you're going to pull in the business process manager, the person who is responsible for the revenue that system's generating. You'll want to pull them in, so you're going to be working up through their chain of command, depending on how severe the incident is on the business side. Because they're typically systems and networks and those types of wonderful things, you'll be working through your technology chain, leadership chain as well. I typically try and go after the folks who are responsible for managing the team that handles the network, the team that handles the systems, those sorts of things. That way, they're able to manage their resources as well. So I'll reach out to, say, a director level position and say, I've got this system over here that's been impacted by an incident. I need somebody from your team that's familiar with that system that can help me with this incident, and then they can go find that person. Instead of going directly to, I know Bob has been working on that system, and I'm going to grab him and bring him into my team to work on this incident. His management chain may get a little upset with you handling it that way. By going through the management chain, you allow them the chance to manage their resources. Same thing with corporate leadership. Typically, when you're moving up into the higher ranks of the executive leadership, I have the executive sponsor handle the escalation there. So CISO will be informed that there's an incident, it's really ugly, you'll probably want to contact the CEO, board of directors, those sorts of things, and then they handle that section of it. Next phase is containment. So these are the tactical activities designed to keep the incident from expanding in severity or limiting the number of hosts that are being infected. So these are, everything from unplug it from the network, turn it off, smash it with a hammer, those sorts of things. Typically, there's two types of containment that you do. Emergency. So your house is on fire, quick, do something about it. These are emergency containment I try and stay away from. It's typically something that you're going to regret later. It's unplanned, so it's usually somewhat sloppy. I try and go for a planned containment strategy. So we've brought in the business folks who are responsible for those systems. I've got the network engineers and the systems engineers all involved. So we sit down and come up with a way on how to contain this incident to keep it from impacting the rest of the business or other systems around it. Build the plan, document the plan, and then we execute the plan. The next step is analysis. So we go out and we identify the sources that we can pull logs from, whether they be from the network, the system itself, our IDS, firewalls, those sorts of things. When you're doing your collection, at this point in time, we don't know, are we going to go and seek legal recourse or not? You typically don't know till the analysis phase is done. So you want to make sure that you have processes in place that are forensically sound when you're collecting your information. You don't want to trample all over your evidence while you're collecting it. You want to, I'll take questions at the end. Thank you. So you want to use forensically sound methods. You want to provide a chain of custody for this stuff. So who collected it, how they collected it, who's been able to touch it, who holds it, those sorts of things. And you also want to take measures to ensure that the evidence that you are collecting is preserved, so that if you do end up going to court, the evidence hasn't degraded in some way. It'd be the same as, you see the cop shows, they mark off the area where the dead body was, and then somebody comes walking right through it. You want to prevent those sorts of things from happening in the digital realm. And then third part of the analysis phase is actually the examination. So who examined it, how they examined it, why they examined it that way, what they found, and then being able to do this in a repeatable method. The next phase is your remediation. So after we figured out what's happened, we've kept it from spreading, now we need to actually take care of the problem, now that we know what it is. 3 steps within your remediation are to, if you need to acquire or put in place the tools and technologies necessary, then you want to, the eradication phase happens where you're actually going to implement those tools, make those changes, those, make everybody change their password, for example, those sorts of things. And then there's actually the last step, the recovery, where you're modifying the impacted system. When I'm doing remediation, I don't want to come back to this system in a week, a month, or a year. So when I'm dealing with an incident, I will pull all the information about if a vulnerability scan's been done on that system, I'll pull the latest one. If one hasn't been done, I'll have it done. Is it running custom-built code? If it is, I'll try and get the latest code scan, if there is one, or have one done. So that way, at the end of the day, I've got a list of, I know that this code's vulnerable and it's vulnerable in these places, so I need to work with development to get these things taken care of. I know that there are these vulnerabilities within the system, so I either need to, make some modifications to its configuration, put some patches on it, those sorts of things. When it comes to remediation, the whole object is to return the system to a more secure state than when you first started dealing with it. So you don't want to correct just the root cause problem of what you're dealing with. You want to be holistic in your view of that system and take care of everything. One of the other things I remind folks of is that your incident is not complete until all the issues that you come out with in your remediation plan are actually taken care of. So you may get the system patched, closed down some ports, made some changes to some configurations, those sorts of things, but until, for example, if you've got code that's vulnerable to being exploited, that's custom built, until your development team fixes those things, you don't close that incident. So you keep coming back to your development team and saying, well, we've got all the rest of this stuff done, we need to get this taken care of as well. And then last step is your post-mortem. So you want to do a root cause analysis of how did this actually happen to begin with in the first place. You want to capture your lessons learned. So what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What capabilities or tools are we missing to be able to handle a future incident that's similar to this one? And then also what needs to be changed or updated. Do we need to make changes to our policy? Do we need to make changes to our standard configurations? Are there any guidelines that we need to create? Is there any information that we should put back into our awareness program so that when we're bringing folks through it, that they are now informed of some of the things that we've discovered? So that takes care of our plan. So we have a basic plan here. It meets many of the standards that are out there. Excuse me. The next step is to actually prepare. So if you think about your fielding, I kind of hate using sports analogies, but you think about you're putting a football team together just because this is America and it's convenient. So I've got some great plays for my team. Now I need to actually prepare the team to take the field. So they're going to need uniforms. They're going to need a ball. They're going to need locker rooms or, those sorts of things. So that's what this phase this portion of the plan takes place. So you want to look at several different areas. You want to take a look at your reporting facilities, any kind of ancillary documentation you need to put together, being able to provide some status tracking. This is actually pretty critical and put a lot of thought into it. You want to assess and fill some gaps that are within there, and then you want to actually build out a list of contacts. So I know that when a system that is responsible for hosting this product goes down or is impacted by an incident, I know that this is the management chain that's responsible for that product, so I need to get them involved. Who do I call to get help with the network? Who do I contact to get help with systems? So your reporting facilities, I like simple and memorable things. So incident@yourdomain.com or yourcompany.com is very memorable, easy to remember. You can also stand up a phone line. In the past, I've used Google Voice just for the sole fact that it was easy to configure. But one of the great things that I liked about it was you call that number, and I can have a rotation set up within there so that at first it calls my cell phone. If no one picks up my if I don't answer my cell phone, it goes to the next person and the next person and the next person. So eventually somebody's going to pick up that phone on that 24/7 rotation to be able to answer the call for help. One of the things that I found within my experience that's very helpful is actually having a dual path reporting chain. What I mean by this is my experience has been that you get hit all the time with what I call commodity malware, right? It's just stuff wandering around the internet. It's kind of like background noise. People get hit with it. It's very simple to clean up. Your antivirus will take care of it. You don't want to spin up an entire incident response process to handle this commodity malware. So the way I've handled it is I set up a dual path reporting chain so that the people role, everybody knows when you're calling up to report an incident, the first thing you do is you call the help desk. And you provide the help desk some tools and training so that they can clean off this commodity malware, or make the simple call that says, hey, you know what, this is worse than just commodity stuff, and so then they contact you. Same thing with your technical specialists, right? Your system admins and your network admins. Someone calls up and says, hey, the system's down, or it's behaving oddly. So you provide them some tools and training so that they can do a quick triage assessment of that system to determine whether this truly is an incident, or it's not a security incident, it's a stability incident, those types of things. You want to make the reporting facilities ubiquitous throughout your incident plan, and you're going to communicate this plan to your entire organization. I typically put the phone, how to report an incident, on a whole page itself, but also on the footer throughout all the documentation, so when anyone's looking through this plan, they can see, once again, this is how you contact these folks. Once you get these things in place, or put the information in, test them. So, I'm sending an email. Does anyone actually pick it up from this email address, at the incident email address I'm sending out? I make the phone call. Does it actually go through? Does anyone pick it up? Then you need to put together some ancillary documentation. Many folks call them procedures. I prefer just to use the title of guidelines. That guidance was provided to me by somebody and it ended up being very valuable to me, at least. If you find yourself in a legal forum and you've got a document that says procedure on it and you didn't do one of the steps, there's a lawyer out there that's going to make hay over it. So if you call it a guideline, even though it is a procedure and you're going to follow these things, you call it a guideline, it gives you legal coverage to say, well, yes, this is our guideline. So by definition, not all these steps are followed all the time. So you want to put some guidelines together for how to do your detection, collection, and analysis of your data. How do you go through your IPS and look for incidents? How do we go about collecting evidence off of a hard drive? How do you go about collecting evidence off of a firewall? What sort of things should I be looking for in my analysis when I'm grinding logs? Those sorts of things. You also want to put together a communications plan. So you want to sit down with, if you have them, corporate communications, legal, whoever that fills this role within your organization, and have them put together just some very simple kind of boilerplate communications that they would use to talk with an entity outside your organization. So if they happen to get a phone call from a reporter, hey, I just saw that your website's been defaced by, the Syrian Electronic Army. What do you have to say about that? They at least have a starting point so that they're not caught totally flat-footed when it comes to having something adequate to communicate out. You also want to put together an incident report template. So at the end of an incident, after you've collected all this information, you've done your post-mortem, you want to be able to adequately communicate this information to some senior manager. There's somebody somewhere up high who's going to be interested in one of these incidents someday. I break mine out into a simple report format, 4 sections. So there's an executive summary. It's basically a paragraph of what happened, if we know who did it, how we fixed it, or what its current status is. The next section is basically a timeline. It's very detailed by date, by time of we discovered it happened at this time. We then did some analysis. We found this in the logs, those sorts of things. You've got your analysis in the end. And then at the very end of it, your post-mortem findings. So what was the root cause of the incident? And what have we learned from it? It's hard to believe, but your incident response analysts, they actually like to have a home life. They actually like to go on vacation. Sometimes they, God forbid, they get sick. So standing up some type of status tracking facility is critical. You have shift changes as well. So what you're looking at this thing providing you is the ability to hand off an incident from one analyst to the next. When you're running with an incident, one of the first things you're going to notice is you're going to get flooded with email. So gathering up these 200 emails and handing them over to somebody else and going, this is where we are with the incident, good luck, have fun, does not work. So you want to be able to have this thing keep track of all the information you collected in the initial detection of the incident, so what systems it was, who you're working with in the various teams, what the status is of your containment phase, of your analysis phase, of the remediation phase, what those plans are, who's responsible for executing what parts of them, those sorts of things. Several different ways you can do it. I've built up a SharePoint site before to handle it. There are several different commercial products that you can go out and research and buy that'll provide this as well. The other thing that the status tracking will provide you is as you're collecting this information and maintaining it within your status tracking tool, you'll be able to pull that data out and use it to generate your metrics later on. So the next thing you want to do is look at assessing and filling your gaps. So these are the capabilities within the team or the tools within your organization or the documentation within your organization that you're going to be relying on to handle an incident. So you want to look at what kind of visibility do you have within your network. Do I have some sections of my network that I get no logs from, logging's turned off, there's no IPS there? What types of tools do I need? Do I have forensics tools? Can I do some log analysis? Can I do memory analysis? Skills within your team, and you meet those with training. So what kind of training do I need? And then whether I need to bring in some consultants for which things, and then whether I want to take a look at doing some advanced capabilities. So as I said, with the visibility, you're going to need several basic things, an asset inventory. So I know this IP address is attached to this system, or I can get that information from my DHCP logs. I know that this system hosts these applications, that provides this business functionality or hosts this product. What software is running on those systems? What data is out there? Where's my critical data? If I have PII or HIPAA-controlled data, where does that stuff reside? You also want information about your network, so a general overview of the architecture. Where are my ingress and egress points of my network? A really good book that I've read, I highly recommend. Richard Balick has a book out called Network Security Monitoring. I highly recommend it. He talks about proper placement of IDS, IPS systems within a network and goes into quite a bit of detail on an open source product called Security Onion. So your tools, several areas you want to look at. One of the things that you have to concern yourself with when dealing with an incident, one of the first things, at least the more advanced adversaries go after, is your email system. And they'll start monitoring your email to find out, do they know I'm in, or they're after information. Some of them go after, financial information so they can make bets in the stock market against you, those sorts of things. So you want to be able to have some way of being able to communicate in an encrypted and secure manner within your team. You also want to look at your log analysis in a SIM. Do we have one? What's it collecting? Are we actually getting the right types of things? Vacuuming everything up is not a solution either. One of the issues that you're going to run across when you're dealing with your analysts is what they call alert fatigue. So if you've got a SIM and the thing's just screaming bloody murder 24/7 with a whole bunch of alerts, you either have a huge problem with a lot of adversaries in your network, which is somewhat rare, or you need to tune your SIM so that your analysts are dealing with fewer alerts, higher quality alerts. If every alert that they're dealing with ends up being a false positive, you're wasting your time and money. You want to look at some type of tools to collect information off of systems, whether they be remote or local to you. So there are several commercial and several open source solutions out there. So you've got a system in Timbuktu and you want to find out who's logged into it. How do you go about doing that? So having some functionality where I can remotely go out, pull files, pull logs, pull memory dumps, those sorts of things. And then you want to take a look at some analysis tools. So what can I use to analyze memory? What can I use to analyze drives? What sorts of things can I use to build a timeline? When you're doing the analysis on systems, one way to quickly discover exactly when and what happened is by building a timeline out of all the artifacts that you can pull off of a system. So you can find out, I see that this registry key was dropped at this time, and so that gives me an indicator around what portion of time I should be searching on other systems. And then looking at tools and capabilities around analyzing malware as well. It's kind of a difficult skill. It's very rare. It's expensive. That may be something we'll talk about in a minute when it comes to consultants. One big thing to look at also when it comes to tools is time sync all the things. Too many times I've gone into organizations and discovered, once again, two systems sitting right next to each other in the same data center. They're off by a couple of minutes. So when I start doing my analysis of their logs, now I have to start playing games with adjusting times on logs and writing code and those sorts of things to handle that. It just makes life a lot easier. I've even recommended large multinationals to just put everything on GMT, no matter where it sits. The system administrators local to those systems, if it's not in GMT, will quickly know how to adjust for the time. But having everything in GMT makes life a little easier as well. So the next thing you need to look at is training in several different areas. You need to provide some training to your organization. So you need to go out and you need to teach or bring awareness to this plan. what their roles and responsibilities are, and how to actually report incidents to you. Simplest part for the training. Your incident response analysts, you need to get them training on the tools that they're going to be using that you selected earlier, and train them on the processes. Big thing to hammer home when you're providing these processes to your analysts is they need to follow them very closely. That way, if there's a problem with the process, it's brought out, you can fix it. And then your technical specialists, so these are your help desk folks, your network folks, your system folks. Provide them training on simple steps on how to do triage of a system or simple malware triage. I've done something as simple as provide some of the, SANS has these trifold triage guides for Windows and Linux. So it walks your system analysts through how to discover, what processes are running, what ports are open, those sorts of things. And then lastly, when you're preparing for an incident, you need to put some time and thought into at what point have I decided, or we've decided, that we're not going to have these certain capabilities in-house, and we're going to actually look to have a consultant provide them. Typically, this ends up falling within the malware realm. Once you select somebody, get them on retainer. I've dealt with organizations that had no one on retainer, and so to get somebody in and working on an incident ends up being slowed down by our friends, the attorneys, because they're going to argue points over legalese within the retainer. And then lastly, you want to build up a list of contacts. What business process leaders do I contact? Who do I contact to get a hold of folks within the network, within the systems functions, within email? When you're building your list of contacts, I've typically used like a wiki page. So as people leave the organization, their roles change, it's easy to update. You also want to look at providing several layers of backup. So when that person goes on vacation, who do I call? If I can't reach them on their cell phone, what's their home number? If I can't reach them in any of those places, who's the next person I call? And then give some consideration to providing some advanced capabilities to your team. Once you get all the basics down, you're running along, your plan's working pretty smoothly, everybody feels comfortable within the organization with it, you can give some consideration to doing two things. The first one's hunting. Typically, most organizations wait until an IPS triggers or their SIM screams about something. When you're dealing with incidents, you'll discover that there are certain indicators that you can build out that'll help you find your adversary in other systems or similar adversaries. It's typically been called hunting. So now, instead of waiting for something to scream at you to say, hey, I think you have a problem, or CNN calls you up and says, hey, I see, Syrian Electronic Army has owned your website, you actually have your team proactively searching within your environment, looking for the bad guys. They're in there, you just don't know it. Go find them. The other issue you can look at is threat intelligence. This helps you become proactive as well. You start better understanding your potential adversaries, how they behave, things you can do to go look for those types of behavior. There's other presentations out there we've already had this week on how to do threat intelligence, but you want to look at whether you want to internally develop your threat intelligence or have a vendor or some open source provide it to you. You need to take a look at your life cycle, so what kind of planning, collection, processing, analysis, dissemination, and evaluation. There's a gentleman, David Bianco. He wrote The Pyramid of Pain. Very interesting. I'd highly recommend you go do some reading on that. It talks about the information you're truly after are the techniques, the processes, and the procedures that your adversaries use. IP addresses and domain names really aren't threat intelligence. So the next step so we've got a plan, we're prepared, we need to practice. Just like a football team, I know how to do, throw the Hail Mary pass. If we don't practice it, it's not going to come off right. So you want to build a repeatable process. You want to use some real-world scenarios on how to do this. You can base these off of the different risk levels you have. So when you're looking at practicing your incidents, how do we handle a denial of service attack? Let's practice that one. What tools do we use? And actually have the analysts use those tools and run through those processes. You want to test each phase as you're going through the 6 phases of your incident response plan, and you're looking for failures in communication and handoffs. There's multiple handoffs and communications that'll happen, and those are usually the places where an organization will fall down. And then as you're practicing these, you want to actually capture your metrics as well that I'm going to be talking about in a minute, and your key performance indicators, so that you can actually validate them. Are these actually accurate for my organization? Are they valuable? Do they provide any meaning to management or to myself or to our team? So the last step is to measure. And what's measured does never improves. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Peter Drucker. He's pretty famous within the auto industry when it comes to those sorts of things. There's a couple of basic ways I measure the performance of an incident management program. These are dwell time, containment time, collection time and volume, analysis time, our false positive rate, and then a couple others that I'll talk about. So your dwell time is the concept of how long was a host compromised before we actually caught it. So how long has my adversary been in my environment before we figured it out? Your containment time, as it states, how long does it take us to actually stop this thing from spreading? Collection time and volume, once we've contained it, how much stuff am I actually collecting on average from my systems, and how long is it taking me to get these things? Same thing with analysis. How long is it taking me to perform my analysis to figure out what really happened? And then your false positive rate, which will provide you some information and senior management as to how effective some of your controls within your environment are. One of the other things I found that's somewhat helpful is, I'm doing good on time. Senior executives are A-type personalities. They love to compete. So I've spent time providing reports, general reports with metrics based on like divisions. So this division's had X number of incidents. Don't really care what type of incidents they are. That division has had X number as well. They'll start kind of jibing each other. Hey, my division's doing a little better than yours when it comes to incidents. And so they'll foster competition amongst themselves. I also look at providing metrics on technology stacks so that they can identify we're having problems when it comes to our Apache deployments, or when we're using Java or building our own types of environments. We're having problems here. Other areas aren't. So we need to concentrate on providing maybe our developers some information on how to develop secure applications, those sorts of things. Okay, so in conclusion, you want to design your plan broadly enough. There's a wonderful old saying in information security, I love standards because there's so many of them. So today, you have certain standards you're trying to follow. There's certain regulations that you're subject to, certain laws. Those things can change. Your business may decide to get into a new vertical. New laws may come along. If you design your plan broadly enough, when these new standards come along, most times you'll have it covered. When you look at NIST and ISO and HIPAA and NERC, when you boil these things down, they all basically say the same things. You should have an IPS. You should not have shared, allow your users to share accounts and passwords and those sorts of things. So they're all kind of when you boil these standards down, they're all kind of somewhat general, all say about the same thing. You want to over-communicate your plan. Everybody needs to know that this thing is there. They need to know how to contact you, who to contact, when to contact. If you don't follow this plan rigorously, you'll never be able to improve it. So you need to follow it to the letter. As you're following it, you will find where it's falling down, where it needs improvement, where it doesn't match your business, and so you can make those improvements. You want to practice often. At least once a year, if not more often, you want to practice your incidents. That way it stays fresh in everyone's mind. You also find the areas where you can continuously improve. And that's it. And it looks like I've got plenty of time for questions. Yes, sir.
When you're talking about lawyers, how early do you prefer bringing them in to the process?
Well, the catch-all is it depends. So, typically, you'll sit down when you're working through building out your matrix of, this is the information I've collected, I've done my assessment, I know generally where this incident falls within my matrix, so now I know at what, I work with my attorneys to find out at what point they want to be contacted. Typically, they'll tell you things like, if PII's been exposed, because then typically they're going to have to then figure out what data sets or whose PII's been exposed. So then they have to find out, okay, is this data, does it belong to somebody who's in a jurisdiction that requires us to report these things? Also, a big tipping point is whether it's only internally known or externally known. And as you're doing your analysis, it'll feed back into your assessment. So as you're going through your analysis, you found one system that's been compromised. You discovered that they've pivoted off of that system and now they're in more, and now they've gotten into this data set over here. So that'll give you an indicator as to when to start calling the attorneys as well. Typically, when things start looking pretty ugly, it's a really good time to start calling attorneys. That's the best guidance I can give you. And it's better to call them earlier than later.
Also, when it's into the closing practice thing,
Yep.
thank you is phenomenal. I was going to say, switch off the on the metrics to track.
Yes.
I saw you had the false positives.
Yep.
That is a thing I keep hammering home to people. You have to know your false positive rate. If your false positive rate is either 0 or 100%, there's something wrong. I did not see on the list that you saw that you crossed positive, positive, negative, negative, or negative, positive. Do you think there's value in tracking the other elements?
I've never really given breaking it out that much thought. One of the great benefits of tracking false positives is it allows you to communicate to management exactly how much effort you're putting into this sort of thing. So they can understand, if you have an extremely high false positive rate, your incident response team is expending a lot of energy dealing with these things. And so when you come to your management and say, hey, my team's swamped, I need more guys, and they turn around and go, well, we've only had 2 incidents this year. What are you talking about? You can turn around and say, well, look, I've got this huge pile of false positives, and so it takes X amount of time for us to deal with these sorts of things, and so all my analysts' time are consumed with these false positives, so we need to do some work on tuning our tools, and we need to possibly get me some more resources.
The follow-up is the ability to do gap measurement to see what areas were being actually monitored effectively. Do you think that has value in the larger scope?
I think it does. The perspective I come from is, I'm thinking about negatives, right? So nothing was reported to you and you did some analysis and found it was nothing, or because when I'm looking at my perspective of like false positives is somebody calls in and says, hey, I think we've got a problem here. So you spin up a team, you get your data, you start collecting information, you go out and do some analysis of a system, and it turns out, oh no, Bob over in system admin went and changed a configuration file and caused this behavior in the system, and it's not really an information security incident, it's more of a stability thing. That's a false positive, right? And so from my perspective, it's either someone calls up and it actually turns out to be a real security incident, or someone calls us up and it turns out to be nothing. It turns out to be another issue. Yes.
A lot of those are actually coupled in the other metrics that you're trying to do. Like, for example, positive negative, yeah, true event that wasn't really important to you, that would be measured as well.
Yep.
And then obviously your true positive or your actual.
Yeah.
What metric they use to kind of cover the negative field was the concept of looking at tracking listeners and how many lifetime teams they went through during a sample time. So I wasn't running that test all the time. I was just running during like a few key windows during the day, and it showed that I was able to show this thing is actually gone and it's actually testing data.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a couple areas where you just don't get in. You get so little information because it's so consistent.
Yeah.
That's really what it means by negative.
Okay.
Verify that it's actually getting a lot.
You've got an IPS and it's actually turned on, it's actually listening, and it's comparing stuff to its rules. It's just that nothing's come by to set the alarm off.
Yeah.
Okay.
You fix the box
Yeah.
effectively.
Yep.
So you make sure it's good.
Yeah. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this. I view that functionality more as kind of like in security engineering. A lot of the organizations I've worked with, they have a team dedicated just to doing incidents, and then they have a team that's dedicated just for the care and feeding of a lot of the tools the incident team relies on. So your IPSs, your SIM, those sorts of things. So they make sure that your IDSs are running current signatures, that they're put in the right places, they're looking at the right things, and they're also tuning them so that they're not, crying wolf all the time. So there's, that kind of difference in at least my perspective when it comes to the roles and responsibilities within IR. Does anybody else have a question or anything? I got plenty of time. I'm here all night.
You said guidelines were particularly good for writing that I evangelically agree with you. I run across so few of them that are common. But sometimes they're running good, and they're written in such techniques that the average user has no chance of following.
Yep.
Do you think there is value in having a guideline in a synopsis format, a synopsis and then a full guideline format, so that you get both those technical levels?
I think there can be some value in that. One way I look at handling these things is, so you've got a gentleman who spends a majority of their time grinding logs, right? So this is the tool they use, this is how they search for stuff, this is why they search for those sorts of things. So I'll have them write up a procedure, I'll title it guideline, and then I'll have them hand it to somebody else. And That's the only contact they get. You give them this thing, and then they're supposed to follow it. And that will flesh out a lot of, these folks, they get so deep into their tools and into their process that they take acronyms for granted, within certain tools, there's certain terminologies, acronyms, we always do it this way, and so they make these assumptions based on their own experience that, well, everybody knows that, this function is 3 layers deep in this menu item, and so you just go click on it, right? And so those things kind of fall out of the document quite obviously when you hand it to somebody who has nothing to do with that role. Yep, because you have to, as you're doing the continuous improvement of your IR program, those are the things you want to look at, and that's why I talk about, follow this plan religiously, because the plan, you start doing your analysis, you pull out your procedures, guidelines on, this is how we capture a hard drive, right? So when you're doing your post-mortem, you'll see that, well, this guideline failed us. It's missing this information. We've changed tools. It hasn't been updated, those sorts of things. So then you can come back and provide some updates to those things that need to be done. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. We handle it a couple different ways. The worst way we've handled it is I get up in the middle of the night and I get a hold of our travel booking agent and I get on a plane and I fly somewhere. We've established relationships with several different consulting or vendors throughout the world so that we know when we're dealing with something in the UK, we've got somebody set up that can help us. But we moved to the model of follow the sun. So we had folks in Singapore, we had folks in the UK, and we had folks here in the US. So there was always somebody up, and they were geographically dispersed enough so that they could cover Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Yeah. No, we do our own boots on the ground a lot of the time. And that's one of the other things you want to look at that I brought up under the tools is you want to look at finding some tools where you can do some of this remote acquisition. And you need to be careful about those. There's several of them out there. Organization I was working for, your typical workstation had a 350 gig hard drive. I'd love to see you stream one of those across a WAN link. I could time it with a sundial, actually a calendar. So you need to take a look at some of the architecture. So some of the things that we had done was we've deployed these systems geographically and allowed remote access into them by our analysts. So I would have a system out in APAC, and it would, it'd pull a drive or it'd pull some information from a system, and then I could have my analysts go in remotely. The tools were there already loaded on the system, and so they could do their analysis, so they're just getting screenshots and mouse clicks and stuff back and forth. So that's one way to handle it. Yep. You always get pushback when somebody's product is going to be taken offline and they get unhappy because they like the revenue and they're responsible for it. That's why you have your senior executive sponsor, because then they handle the whole liaison between the more senior business folks. So you can go to them and say, hey, Here's the situation. We have to take this system down. There's no two ways about it. You know, I've got this person who on the business side is responsible for that system, and they're fighting with me over this. Either provide me another, you know, if you're aware of another solution, then, you know, provide it to me and help me, or, you know, reach out to this business through the higher levels and help me make it happen. So use your chain of command. Yep. Yep.
One of the things that was in the training that I was really interested in was I asked, what is it serious quality to not understand business and understand, at least have a 10-mile view of, 10 mile